Canvas, yes, the software your school uses to do online work, was hacked and hundreds of millions of student and staff records were stolen. When students logged into Canvas on May 7th, 2026, many saw this message. A ransom note, threatening to leak confidential data of the students, the very students looking at this message.
Moving on now to that massive cybersecurity breach that's knocked out the online system used by millions of college students. How widely is Canvas really used?
The hackers are actually threatening to release stolen data if a ransom isn't paid by next Tuesday.
Last week, a hacking group broke into the system, cutting off access to course materials and communication.
It's a group that we know as Shiny Hunters.
It's the holy grail, basically.
The company in charge of Canvas, which is a company called Instructure, took down the platform. Maybe paying this ransom or negotiating with the hacker groups.
I mean, I'm worried.
But how is this possibly allowed to happen? Today, I'm going to be breaking down the full compromise of Canvas. Let's start with Canvas's infrastructure. Canvas is owned by a private company and provides an online platform for students to do assignments, contact teachers, or generally do school-related activity. I didn't learn this till after the video, but this is called an LMS, a learning management system, and it does exactly what I just said. If you've recently done any kind of coursework online, there's a high probability that you've used Canvas. Almost 10,000 schools globally use Canvas to support their curriculums online. They're used in over half of the research institutions in the US, and 100% of Ivy League schools. Like all of them. This is millions of student records that they record and have access to. Canvas is contracted by schools and school districts for millions. In these contracts, Canvas and their parent company have a responsibility to protect these student records, as well as laws in place that obligate them legally. They've had minor security breaches in the past, but this most recent breach is their largest one yet. In order to understand the full extent of this hack, we need to start at the beginning. April 29th, 2026. Canvas detects a security breach in their system. They trigger their internal measures and contacted law enforcement to tell them the breach took place. At this point, no schools or anyone outside Canvas was notified, other than the police. April 30th, 2026. Canvas continues to work on the hack. They're patching vulnerable systems and trying to isolate what the hackers have access to. It's important to note that this is kind of like damage control. The system had already been compromised, and the hackers had a large window to make copies. The group that infiltrated Canvas's systems is known as Shiny Hunters, and they aren't rookies at this sort of thing. This group has an extensive history of hacking databases, leaking, selling, or blackmailing the extracted information. In 2020, they got into Wattpad and Tokopedia databases. They were also linked to an MGM Resorts leak and the service Home Chef. And in 2024, they hijacked Ticketmaster consumer data and payment methods, as well as AT&T and Santander Bank. So it's safe to say they knew what they were doing. May 1st, 2026. Shiny Hunters claims publicly that they have 275 million records at 8,800 institutions. It's not uncommon for cybercrime groups like this to do this. They want media attention, giving them more leverage in a ransom. It also acts as free advertising for criminals looking to buy the data should they sell it. Schools still didn't have any notice. Only the claim of stolen data was made online. The hackers then leaked a small amount of documents as proof that they indeed had that shit. May 2nd, 2026. By now, the schools are aware of the claims online and have began internal procedures. This took place during finals week, so they started making backup plans and calling their IT departments. This day consisted entirely of internal panic within the schools, and Canvas just didn't make a statement. May 3rd, 2026. The schools start sending their own notices to students and staff. Canvas's parent company, Instructure, finally makes a statement. They admitted that the security had been compromised and that they indeed did steal data, but they didn't clarify what was stolen. They also implied that the hackers were no longer in their systems and the hack wasn't a big deal. Throughout this whole situation, there's going to be a consistent theme of them downplaying how bad they got finessed. My favorite example is on their website. They have this page of a bunch of pre-answered PR questions, and one of them asks, if Canvas is safe to use, and in their response, the word safe isn't used once. After this public statement was made, the media took this and ran. Canvas is pretty popular, so this was a pretty big deal. It's worth mentioning the data breach also affected Instructure's other services, but Canvas was the most popular, so. May 4th, 2026. The schools can't really do anything. There's an entire day where the school was just wondering if they had been compromised, waiting to see what happens. A bunch of schools didn't use Canvas this day and made more plans to switch to in-class work. Also, the media was having like a field day with this. Anything to do with kids is like a great headline. May 5th, 2026. Today, the story blows up. Large outlets like Wired and TechCrunch publish investigations into the hack. This is when we got the new information that student data was part of the leak, and that Canvas had been contacted by the group for ransom. There's still no note or anything. I let you in on this earlier, so it's less exciting the second time you hear it. This raised concern for a lot of people because communications data had a lot of sensitive information, especially among the staff. May 6th, 2026. Canvas drops a statement suggesting that the situation is stabilizing, but reports show that the hackers actually escalated. The current ransom negotiations with Instructure were stalled, so they started pressuring schools to pay ransoms to secure their own data. It also says they got, in quote, more aggressive, which I like to imagine means the guy on the other end of the laptop started typing faster. May 7th, 2026. This is when the shit hit the fan. Schools around the globe start reporting outages and login issues, as well as straight up threatening students directly. I just want to take a moment to read the ransom note because it genuinely made me laugh the first time I saw it. I thought it was fake. Shiny Hunters has breached Instructure again. Instead of contacting us to resolve it, they ignored us and did some security patches. If any of the schools in the affected list are interested in preventing the release of their data, please consult with the cyber advisory firm and contact us privately at talks, which for those of you who aren't chronically online is just a encrypted chat, to negotiate a settlement. You have until the end of the day by 12th of May 2026 before everything is leaked. They then proceed to leave the list of schools and their .onion website. You don't understand how hard this was for me to believe when I first saw this. Like, this is so funny. I took a personal gander at this list of schools, and I am here to let you know that your school, my school, any school you've been to, any school you think of going to, is definitely on this list. I feel like these ransom screens were intentionally designed to look cool to get even more media attention, because that's what they did. At this point, all eyes were on Canvas and what they were going to do. They would end up disabling Canvas services and started implementing, in quote, emergency security measures. It is also at this time that the FBI gets involved. With the scale of this breach, the fact it's used by schools like all over, this isn't surprising. May 8th, 2026. Instructure's investigation leads to one of their features called free for teacher accounts. These type of accounts didn't require the same authentication process that the typical educator accounts did, allowing shiny hunters to gain access to the software without proving who they are. From here, they were able to infiltrate the data stored through Canvas and steal it. Don't ask me how, it is definitely out of my understanding. So they temporarily disabled the feature to prevent any more access, which they kind of made it seem like they did that before. So either one of two things happened here. Both of them don't make them look good. Either they lied when they said they got them out the first time, which would completely break down brand trust, and you hold, millions of student records and private information, so that would be bad. Or they got hacked twice, which the insinuation in Shiny Hunter's ransom note was that they did hack them twice. Or it's less of an insinuation and more of gloating, but May 10th, 2026. Absolutely nothing happens. I'm not going to waste your time and talk about how it was on the news again. Nobody did anything this day. It was all just panic. At this point, the fuck up was really big and really public. So much so that Instructure's CEO, this guy, apologized for poor communication from Canvas, saying that users deserved, in quote, more consistent communication. You don't say. He doesn't directly acknowledge if there were two hacks or if they lied the first time, or even if they just thought they got them out the first time. Like, that would have sufficed too. I think he was intentionally vague here because he's expecting lawsuits against the company, and any public statement here confirming or denying these details wouldn't look good in court.
If I speak, I am in big trouble. In big trouble.
But he also confirmed what information was and wasn't leaked. Usernames, email addresses, course names, enrollment information, and any messages on the platform were leaked. The reason I emphasize enrollment information is because this wasn't made clear before by any leaks or any statements, and this is where all the personal and confidential identification details are, so all the stuff that can steal your identity. This is like handing someone, or no, not someone, a criminal, your academic record with your identification details stapled to the back. But don't worry, because course content, submissions, and credentials were not compromised. You know, the course content that's copyrighted and under NDA so they get sued if it gets leaked. Or the submissions that would cause systematic grading errors across schools. Or the credentials that if they were to reissue new credentials would cost them a lot of money. Yeah, that stuff. Your personal identification information, yeah, they got that. But all the profitable stuff for the company on the other end, that's fine. So it's all cool. May 11th, 2026. Officially less than 48 hours out from the ransom deadline. The clock was ticking. People were worried. Schools were worried. Everyone was concerned. At 10:16 Eastern, on a school night, Instructure posted an update saying they had, quote, reached an agreement. Now, unless your brain is smooth, you know what this implies. I would like to remind you that the FBI was involved here. You know, like the big dogs that are supposed to step on shit. So the fact a ransom was paid implies that the FBI was unable to catch the culprits. I mean, if they did, it would have been boasted about, I'm sure. Former FBI Cyber Division agents and ransomware negotiators also agree that the details of the case indicate a ransom was paid, in case it wasn't apparent. So, where does this leave Canvas? Are they legally liable? What about all the kids that information was stolen? In Utah, there's already a federal lawsuit that alleged Instructure failed to do enough to protect the platform and made itself, quote, easy prey for criminals. There have also been several class action lawsuits that have been filed. It's safe to say they will be buried in paperwork for the foreseeable future, unless they settle these cases quickly. Liability in cybercrime is complicated. There's a general standard of security that these companies are legally required to have, but it's not very specific. For example, the term encrypted. There's levels to being encrypted. The contracts between the district and school clients heavily limit how responsible Instructure actually is. It's in there the same way that like medicine commercials will list a bunch of really bad symptoms at the end of their ad as side effects. Like, you know, just in case you die, it's not our fault. Yeah, if all the personal identities of all your students get leaked, that's not our problem. The contracts mostly state how the company will follow the law and notify and provide aid to schools during a breach. Not much covering their liability, at least not that's public. They discuss their legal requirements when handling student data, but what is the law? What are they required to do? A couple of things come into play here outside of their individual contracts. Federal student privacy, state data breach laws, and general negligence laws. At the federal level, there is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA. FERPA regulates mostly at the school level and requires reasonable protection of records and controlled disclosure, as well as limiting how many people have access and cooperating in the event of a breach. From here, there's a lot of overlap with state laws. They typically require organizations to handle data breaches responsibly, notifying parties and investigating. What would hold Canvas the most accountable would be negligence laws. This poses the question of if they took the reasonable measures leading up to and during the hack. It really comes down to if their security measures were reasonable for the confidentiality of the data they were managing, as well as their way of notifying all the parties. The tricky thing here is that the cybercrime defense standards, that there aren't very many of, are relatively low compared to the level of threat that criminals can pose. This is a result of the government's lack of policy innovation in the tech realm. Tech evolves fast, and the government is infamously slow when it comes to implementing and changing current policy. As of right now, there's no public proof that Canvas showed any negligence. But it is very early in the case, and it's possible that these developments will appear in the future. Even if they are guilty, there's a chance they might win the case anyway. But beyond that, this event poses two big questions that are important to consider in policy going forward. To what extent should schools be privatizing their student data, and how effective is government policy in regulating cybercrime? These are millions of academic records on millions of people, many of which are minors, at the fault of a private entity. To blame the criminals would be incredibly naive. Criminals are always going to exist. It's the job of the people with the data to protect it. Students have a right for their records to be private, and it is the responsibility of the government to protect these rights, which leads to the second question. How effective is government policy on cybercrime? In 2017, the consumer credit reporting agency Equifax was compromised of almost 150 million people's information. Before the attack, auditors had logged multiple vulnerabilities in their systems and urged them to update these measures. That would have cost money, and there was no legal requirement at the time holding them accountable to invest in these securities. As a result, the private information of over 100 million people was taken, violating all of their privacy rights. Another case of cybercrime in 2021 was on the Colonial Pipeline, who were crucial in transporting fuel across the country. Their system was compromised, and the hackers were able to lock out employees of key operations. As a result, the transport of fuel was halted and gas shortages started to pop up. They held the system for ransom, and the pipes were down for 6 days. Immediately, the government triggered a federal emergency. This was oil after all. Despite the government's interference, Colonial Pipeline paid the ransom to resume operations. What's that whole thing about we don't negotiate with terrorists? In both of these cases, the damage was already done and the reparations after the fact had little effect on the victims. Following these cases, the government updated policy. But we shouldn't be waiting for failures to innovate policy. We should be evolving policy to fit the extent of criminals' capabilities in the time. And we can start to see this happening now. At the time of making this video, it's reported that the House of Homeland Security Committee sent a letter requesting that Instructure's CEO or another senior executive brief the committee about the details surrounding the events and the coordination with the FBI and CISA. This isn't direct policy, but with legal pressure from lawsuits, it could improve the regulations on cybercrime, leading to change in the future. The Canvas hack is part of a bigger issue in the world, where technology is ever evolving and criminal innovation is ahead of the security protocol of the government. It's not different than cartels innovating beyond law enforcement in certain countries. The only separation is that these criminals aren't seen. If policy doesn't evolve with the digital world fast enough, it will be overrun with crime. In recent years, both the knowledge barrier to commit these crimes and the amount of people capable of things like this has increased, and will continue to grow as computers become more integrated into our society. Canvas and these other hacks will be small in comparison to future crimes if changes don't happen. More and more data is being digitally stored, especially with modern surveillance companies like Palantir, making it all the more important that these protections are in place. If you have any thoughts or things to add, there's plenty of room below to let me know. I like exploring these kinds of topics and researching these kinds of things. I make video essay type content like this often, so if you enjoyed this video, check out my page. You might find something else you like. But other than that, I'm out.